Welcome to the 84 Lumber Estimating Video Training Program. Today we're going to cover how to build parts within your assemblies or templates. Let's get started. Let's go ahead and select the estimating section here located on the left hand side of your software. And within here we're going to select the templates. Remember, during the first video we mentioned the parts catalog, which is controlled corporately. If you want, you can select the templates. And once we select the templates, we'll see our assemblies that we started with the other day. For example, our 84 lumber assemblies. Within here, in the last video, we built a couple different things, such as subfloor material, so forth and so on. Today we're going to go ahead and we're going to add some interior wall assemblies. We've already added a 2x4 8-foot interior wall, and now we want to apply parts to this. Once you select the plus sign, you can then select part. Within here, you can select the material. And now once again, you can always key punch and see if your item is located within here. So for example, if we were wanting to utilize a mud sill 2x4x16, we could do that. If we select that, then we can see that everything fills in. Once again, hit save. And then we could go to our properties and once again see our formulation and check out our variables. This is one way of adding a part, as we showed in the last video. Now, once again, you can modify these components. So for example, if you want, you could come in and simply change this and adjust the point of cell number. And then, for example, call this a standard bottom plate instead of calling it treated. And once again, modifying that is simple as adjusting the name and putting in the correct point of cell number that we utilize within the company. Once again, you can adjust your variables as need be, depending on what you would like to utilize for this project. Let's go ahead and let's look at this formula. So within this formula, let's go into our editor by selecting edit. And within here, this is our advanced property settings. So our advanced property setting allows for us to adjust just this property, and that property is quantity. Within here, we could have provided a description. We have a couple different types. If we drop this down, we can see that we have types such as yes, no. These are question boxes that you can enter. A checkbox. You can lock a list, which you can create a list here and lock it. You can create an open list where it's modifiable. You can create this as a memo or note field. You can also define whether what is going to be entered in the formula is a number or a text. For most of our stuff, we will utilize text. As you can see, within here you have text and also numbers. So you do want to utilize text for this. Inside of the formula field, if you simply select this is your formula builder. Your formula builder allows for you to build all of your formulas. Very quickly, let's take a look at what this formula is. We will then get into how to create this formula from scratch. As you can see, it has a formulation such as linear value divided by a material length multiplied by a number of plates times ultimately a waist, and at the end of that, rounded up. This is the by hand method that we would utilize to calculate this material by hand. Once again, taking the total length of a wall, dividing it by the material that we're going to ship out, multiplying it by however many plates that we have, and then once again adding a waist and then rounding it up to the nearest piece. Let's go ahead and let's go through this from scratch. Let's hit save. At this point, let's say that we want to build one of these for a top plate. Let's go ahead and once again select part, hit material, type in 2x4 by 16, And then at this point here, you can type in a description. As you can see, whenever I was entering this in, once again, it was dropping down all those materials. But this time we're going to assume that one of these materials are not the correct material. Let's go ahead and hit save. And at this point, let's go ahead and select properties. Once we select properties, we see there's additional information we need to fill out. Once again, if you know the correct description that was located within our point of sale number system, you can simply enter that in here. We can then also key punch in the POS number if we know what it is. So for example, this is 20406 or 2041601. We can then select the division if you want to utilize this. For example, CSI division number 6, wood and plastics. The color field is not necessarily important. You do not need to define the color field. And at this point here, we can now go into our advanced properties. So looking at our advanced properties, to explain this, each and every one of these items is a property. They are contained within groups. If we minimize this, you can see that here's your property groups. So we have 4 property groups located within this single part. And these are the defined property groups that load automatically with every single component that you start within the software. For example, work breakdown, variables, pricing, and estimating. Within each one of these, you're going to have certain information. For example, work breakdown is going to contain items such as phase, location, and PMA. Within variables, you're going to have things such as waste percent and load. Within pricing, you're going to have things such as cost each, cost markup, cost total, markup each, price total, and so forth. Within estimating, you're going to have things such as your area value, which is what is calculated whenever you do a square footage, the count value, which is the total calculated from a count, and the linear value, which is the total linear footage counted. And then ultimately, here's your quantity. Your quantity is where you're going to want to enter your formulation to allow for your final result. So whenever you're estimating your material, this result will appear within your estimate. So let's go ahead and jump into our quantity. Once again, within our quantity, we have a couple different options. For example, property data, like I mentioned earlier, contains things such as your name, your description, the type that you would like to utilize, your grouping structure, which should be already locked and defined. The only time that this is modifiable is whenever you're creating a brand new group, then you can, a brand new property, then you can assign it to a specific group that's already labeled within, or create a new group that's unique to it. Your formulation, once again, is where your formula will output to, and this is where you'll enter this in. The inputs, allow input, basically allows for you, as you saw in the first video, for those input variables. For example, with quantity, we would not want to utilize the input because we're not going to be entering any information on the fly. Unit of measure, we're going to utilize each for this, but if, for example, you were calculating sheets, you may want to use sheets, and so forth and so on. Decimal places is 2. Finally, a list. At this point here, you can type in a unique list, and I'll show you within the load tool how that list is defined. So let's go ahead and let's select property. To get started, we want to start building our formulation. At this point, let's go ahead and select the X2 button to go into our formula builder. Within your formula builder, you can now start to build your formulation. Let's see, how do we do this by hand? At this point here, we're going to calculate out top plates. So we want to take the total linear value, and what you can see, this here is all the properties that are located within your property area. So if we would have created some variables, those variables would appear within here. We can also go into functions and operators, which is all your round up, round down, square, pi, parentheses, plus signs, minus signs, divide signs, and multiply. So let's get started. When doing this by hand, we need to select our linear value. By simply double clicking this item, your linear value will appear. Now, to keep this simple, if we were going to do this by hand, and we know that this is a 2x4x16, we would then want to divide this by 16, which would be your total length. At that point there, we can calculate out how many plates we need if we were only applying one plate to that. Let's go ahead and let's wrap this in parentheses. The reason we wrap these in parentheses is to simply allow for this formulation to occur first before it moves on to the next formulation. So at that point, we have the linear value divided by 16. So that is your total length divided by the length of the material that you're going to utilize. We then need to multiply that by, and we can say 1 for one single bottom plate, or if we were going to double this up, such as this, because we're doing a top plate, we'd want to double it up as a double top plate. And then once again, wrap that in parentheses. And then ultimately at the end, we would want to come in and multiply it. And let's put a parenthesis here. And this formulation for utilizing the waste is what can standardly be used. Now, if you wanted to, you can come in, if you knew that your waste was always going to be 10%, you can multiply it by how we would do in a calculator, which is 1.10, for example. But to allow for this to be a variable that you can adjust, we can simply come in and we can select that, and we come in and say waste, and we add 100, and then we divide it by 100. And now at this point, we could wrap this whole entire thing in parentheses. And in the beginning, in all capitals, type in round up. And there we go. We've essentially built a basic formulation that we would use to calculate this material. We can now at this point here hit save. And there we go. So as you can see, calculating the formulas are very simple. Once again, some of the things where you're going to see the biggest error results will be in the fact that your parentheses are not in the right place, or you have too many parentheses, so forth and so on. But at this point here, we can see that we have one parenthesis here, one parenthesis here, one parenthesis here, one parenthesis there, one parenthesis there, and then finally one at the end. We've rounded it up. Everything works. Now, if you wanted to get more advanced with this, you could. Let's go ahead and let's get a little more creative. Now remember, in the first video, we created and modified things such called variables. Like I showed you in the last formulation, we can simply come in here and add a variable to this component. By doing that, we simply hit this plus sign here. It allows for us to add a variable, and we can come in and we can say material length, for example. We can drop this down, once again selecting text. We can say 16, and you could have selected a number there if you wanted to. Once again, the grouping structure is under the variables because that's where we're assigning it to. We go to inputs, and yes, we would like this to be an input. What is the unit of measure? Well, we want to type in the total feet, so it's going to be feet as a unit of measure. And let's go ahead and hit save. And there's our material length. We can then go in here and add another variable, and we could say number of plates, for example. We could then go in, select this once again, type in 2. We can go to our input values, allow input, and here we could just say each. Once again, select save, and now we've created 2 different variables. The reason we create these variables, it allows you to reutilize these items without having to necessarily go into the formulation or the quantity formula every time to modify little things. You can modify these within this area a lot faster and easier than having to go into your formula and taking a chance of accidentally entering the incorrect information and messing up your formulation. So now to utilize these, let's go back into our formula. Let's hit edit. Let's go to property here. Let's select our formula. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply enter down because I want to leave the old formula here for the time being while we build a new formula. So what we're going to do is, once again, let's get started. We're going to select first, like we did here. We're going to take our linear value. We're then going to divide. And we can select now our new variable, which is material length. We once again then can wrap this in parentheses, one at the beginning, one at the end. We then can multiply it by the number of plates on the wall. Once again, wrapping that parenthesis. And there we go. We can then multiply it by, as we did earlier, the waste percent plus 100, parenthesis, divide by 100, parenthesis, and then at the end here, we're going to come in, we're going to type in one more parenthesis, and we're going to type in round up in all caps. And there we go. Now, if we look at these two formulas side by side, we've essentially done the exact same thing that we did at the top. We simply came in, we selected a linear value, which is what is going to be fed during the takeoff process. As we're measuring around, it's going to calculate that, and it's going to enter it here. We divided it by 16 and then multiplied it by 2. And then once again, multiplied it by the waste and then rounded up. We did the exact same thing below by simply selecting a linear value, dividing it by our material length that we have designated, and within that variable, we entered the variable of 16. Once again, we can adjust that if it was going to be a 14-foot board instead of a 16-foot board, and so forth and so on. And we also have the number of plates. So we multiplied it by the number of plates, which can be one plate for a bottom plate, or one plate for a single top plate, or two for a double top plate, so forth and so on. So once again, this component becomes more powerful because you can quickly adjust these variables on the fly. We then multiplied it by the waste, and then at the end of the day, round it up. So let's go ahead and let's delete this old formulation out of there, and let's just go with this one. Let's hit save. Let's hit save, and there we go. And I'm gonna actually call this a double top plate, and I hit save. I hit close. And there we go. Now, the beauty of this here is if we needed to modify this again, like I showed you earlier, you can modify these components. So for example, if we wanted to go ahead and duplicate this whole assembly, we can now duplicate this assembly. We could come in here and we could say that this here is a 9-foot wall. Or a 2x6 wall. So this is a 2x6. Switch to color. Let's hit update. It'll add this variable or add this assembly here for you. And now once again, we have 2x4x16s. We can, instead of deleting and replacing them, we can simply come in and modify a few items. So once again, here we go. We can select 2x6x16. Let's say, for example, we wanted to go ahead and make this a 14-footer. We can go ahead and do that. We can come into our POS number and adjust this accordingly. So we can say this is a 2061401. And then once again, because we've entered these variables in, we do not need to go inside of the formula here to modify it. We can actually just go quickly to our variables here and adjust those. So we can say that this is now a 14-footer instead of a 16-footer. And we simply hit save. We go there, we hit close, and now let's say for the top plates, the double top plates, we actually want to go ahead and use 16 footers for the double top plates. So there we go, 16, and then we can simply come in once again and adjust that and hit save. Now if I needed to duplicate, for example, any of these items along here, I could do that too. I could simply duplicate these items here, individually duplicate these parts, if need be. So let's say, for example, we want to come in here and let's say we want to duplicate this here. We want to make these top plates staggered. So we're using a 2x6x16. We want to use a 2x6x14. So we simply hit duplicate, modify this here. I can simply come in here, say 14 footers, and then at that point there hit save, and then hit close. So I can quickly duplicate these individual parts also, not only just being able to duplicate only the main component, we can also duplicate the individual parts underneath it. Now, by being able to do that, once again, here at 84 Lumber, we often use the 20-20-60 rule when it comes to our plating. So for example, if we were wanting to use 20% 12s, 20% 14s, and 60% 16s, we could easily do that. Once again, I've duplicated these items, so let's go ahead and hit save here. And let's close this. You can see that now that I have a couple different components. So I have the top plate 16, top plate 14, top plate 12. Now if I currently measure this around, these are going to calculate way too much material. So what I need to do is I need to modify that. And using the 20-20-60 rule within the company, this is very easy to do. What we can do is we have what's called the number of plates. So if we have the number of plates, we can modify this. So if you look at 60%, 60% for example would be 0.6. If you were doing just one plate. So if you were putting one plate down, 60% or 0.6 would be the amount of material that you would need. So within our formula, we have 2 plates. To think of this here, if you wanted to utilize this rule, for example, you would simply multiply 0.6 times 2, which would be 1.2. And that would allow for 1.2 plates for the 16 footers. Hit save. And we can see our 14 footers, for example, here. We can simply come in, and these here could be, for example, if it's 20%, it would be 0.2 multiplied by 2, which would be 0.4. For the 14, we'd hit save, we'd hit close, and there we go. And once again, we can do the exact same thing here and say 0.4. Now by doing that, the percentage of coverage for these 3 items equals up to 100%. Once again, 1.2, because we're doubling this up, we're adding 2 plates, so 1.2 to 0.4 and then 0.4 again. That essentially adds up to a total of 2 plates or whole 100% of coverage. Now lastly, if we wanted to go ahead and add some sheathing to, for example, an exterior wall, which we have some sheathing here, but let's go ahead and delete this sheathing out, and let's go ahead and build something with the area here. Alright, so once again, adding a piece of sheathing to an exterior wall, we can simply come in, once again hitting a part, selecting material, selecting the part name, and then once again selecting this here. We can say 7/16 by 4/8 OSB. As you can see that material is in here, but if it wasn't, we'd simply just go ahead and continue, and I would call this wall sheathing, and I'd simply hit save. So let's go ahead and select our properties menu, drop this down. We can now go ahead and key punch in our point of sale number. We can then go into our quantity formulation. When selecting the quantity formulation, once again, you can calculate this out. Now, since we are utilizing a linear measurement, we'd want to utilize a linear tool. To calculate out the total square footage, what we would do is we take the linear tool and we would multiply it by the wall height. So for example, this is a 9-foot high wall. Now, once again, let's think of this a little bit outside of the box. How can we make this more customizable? Well, we can do that once again through using variables. So let's go ahead and let's hit save. Let's leave this with just linear value, and let's go ahead and let's add some variables. For example, one called wall height. If we go into our variables, we can once again select the plus sign here located at the top of the property group. We can come in and we can say that we are looking for wall height. Once again, the type is text. We know that for this one it is 9. We can select our input values, allow input, and this will be done in feet. And there we go. Now what that's going to allow for us to do is calculate out the material based off the wall height. Now, we can come into our estimate. We can go ahead and select edit, our X2. And now we have that linear value. So now I'm going to take that linear value, multiply by the wall height. Once again, make sure we're putting our parentheses around. Whoops. And there we go. And then at that point there, we need to divide it by the coverage of one sheet. And we know that we're utilizing a 4x8 sheet. So the total coverage for that sheet, which is 4 times 8, which equals 32 square feet. So we're going to take the linear value, which we multiply by wall height, divided by the total sheet coverage, which is 32. We will then go ahead and enter in another parenthesis. And then at the end of this here, once again, simply go in and type in our waist value. So waist plus 100 divide by 100. Add another parenthesis here, and then once again, let's round it up to the nearest piece. And there we go. So we've now round up linear value multiplied by wall height. So if we had 100 linear feet and we multiplied it by a 9-foot wall height, we'd have 900 feet. We then would divide that by 32 and then multiply that by the waist and then ultimately round that up at the end of that number. And whenever ready, we can simply hit save. And that is how you build parts within assemblies within Square Takeoff. Thank you for watching the 84 Lumber Estimating Video Training Program. If you have any other additional questions, you can always reach me at matt.miller@84lumber.biz. You can also participate in our weekly webinar training series, which happens every Tuesday and Thursday for Level 1 and every Friday for Level 2. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.